Hello, everyone. It's Jenny Fennick here. Welcome you to another episode of Coach Magic with my dear friend, Angela Chee. Oh my gosh, we're in for a treat. Let me tell you a bit about Angela, and then Angela and I could talk for a million hours and we'd still have things to talk about. So you all are going to go on the ride with us today. Angela is a keynote speaker, MC, media and communication coach. She's a podcast host and author of her new book, The Power of the Only. Own your voice, thrive in any environment. She helps people own your only and be you amplified, empowering them to be clear, confident, and connected on camera and off, and step into their full imagined potential. She believes being the only is not a weakness, it is your greatest strength. Angela, what I love about you have a background as a former TV news anchor and a reporter. You know a lot about the media. You helped launch Entertainment Tonight China. You've been on shows on E, on HGTV. And I learned this when I looked at your bio that your speaking career began at age 15 when you became the first Asian American woman to win the title of Miss California National Teenager. I can totally see that, Angela.
Ages ago. Well, when we first met, we talked about our girl state days,
That's
right?
right, girl state.
I love what you're about. But yes, ages ago. But I think that's what started the journey. But I didn't always start off like that. I was kind of like that nerdy immigrant child. But yeah, that was a big milestone in my life. I think that really sparked a lot of speaking and different things, was those old pageant days.
Right, the pageant days. And I don't know if we discussed this. Yeah, that's right. You had that pageant. I had my high school pageant, which was called the Miss New Smyrna Beach High School competition. And I won that pageant just like you won your pageant. I had never done a pageant before. I didn't
Me
consider
either.
myself, but right. And you're like, all of a sudden you're on this stage and you go, this is kind of fun.
Well, I don't think we were as savvy as the people are now. It was like very wholesome. I submitted some grades. I saw some women on TV that had done like Miss Teen USA. And I'm like, Mom, I want to win scholarships. And this one was different. It wasn't televised. But yeah, it was based on scholarship. There was evening gown interviews, a lot of cool girls. It was kind of like Girl Skate, but with like a competition. But I learned a lot. And it pushed me out of my comfort zone. And I think that really, really helped like for my path. But super wholesome back in the day.
Exactly. My pageant was at my school, hosted by my school. It was it was a fundraiser for the senior class, and you could only participate when you were a junior. And so I said, I'm going to do this. And I didn't quite know what my talent was going to be. We had to have a talent. And I thought, well, maybe I'll do like a dance. Even though I wasn't really a dancer, I was a cheerleader. I could dance, but I wouldn't consider myself a dancer. But I was like maybe 2 months before the pageant, my sister died. And then I realized what my talent was going to be. I wrote a poem about her and recited it in front of the whole freaking school. I ended up winning the pageant, winning most talented. But it was, to your point, you learn something about yourself. You learn you can get on a stage in front of a crowd, most of whom you don't know. You have these nerves, but you really band together with the other women who are in this wild thing with you. And gosh, if you experience success, or even if you don't, success is just doing it. But let's say you win, like you and I did. It is this indicator. Keep going. Keep using your voice. Keep shining your light. So first off, congratulations on your new book. How does it feel?
Thank you. Oh my goodness. Look, I'm holding it in my hand. Look at that. Oh my gosh. Well, if you're interested in writing a book, it's a long journey, right? They have these like publish a book in a weekend. And this took like I think when we first met, I talked about it. It was the first time. It's like 7 years ago. The first time I was like, oh, there's power in being the only. And I was like, wait a second, I've always been the only this, the only that. And that's where the fruition happened. I was having a conversation and people were asking me my story. I was like, well, I've always been the only Asian girl, or I was the only Asian reporter, or the only woman keynote speaker. And then I was like, but that's powerful. And so, it's amazing that I spent the last 6 years thinking about it, 4 years researching it, and probably 2 years writing it. And it's here. So thank you.
Oh my God. No. And it is so true. Thank you for saying that. You need time to bring this to life. You really do. And I think the best books, you're excavating, you are digging, you are finding those stories. And it's not easy because some of these stories are painful to recount that, like what it felt like to be the only in your case, and maybe it felt a little lonely, or no, people didn't really understand you and you felt kind of like this outcast. Or, I wrote my book years back and it took me many years. It took me many years, same as you. And some of those stories were quite intense to excavate. Speaking of books, Angela, I've just been talking about this book because it's freaking captivated me right now.
What?
And it's huge out there. It's like, you probably have heard of it and maybe even are reading it. The Tell by Amy Griffin. Have you heard of that?
I've heard of it. My friend went to a book reading in Santa Monica, but I have not read it yet.
Okay. Because we're talking about excavating stories, what she did in that book, and I'm not finished with it yet, but it's one of those where like, I got to keep reading. She really went deep, and it's super powerful. And I think for those of us who have stories to tell, like Angela, like myself, like I know a lot of you who are tuning in right now, it is really powerful to learn from other storytellers, to learn from other messengers. You see different techniques, and it gives you courage. So Angela, how did you get the courage to write this book, to tell this story? How did you know it was time you had to do it?
Well, and I also want to share that my book, the opening chapters read like a memoir, but I interviewed onlys for the last 4 years. So it's not just my story. I excavated and almost, because my background's a journalist. So it's almost like, well, great, I have my story. I believe in these things. These are my 5 principles. Like I knew exactly what I wanted to say, like right out of the gate. But then it was like, well, is this true? What's the science to back it? What does it mean? Does someone else feel this way? And so for 4 years, I literally, whenever I went to TED Women, I went to events. Every time I saw someone that embodied the power of the only, and the power of the only is someone who feels like the only, but they embody the traits of why does someone see it as a strength? And some other people, it holds them back. And so I was curious about that dynamic, because I wasn't always this way. I created who I am through years of, peeling back the layers. So I wanted to find out the through line. And so that's what's cool about the book, is that it's an excavation, not just of my story, but of dozens of stories, CEOs, founders, women. And it's not just women. I decided that I wanted to write about onlys that felt like they were creating change or navigating the status quo, navigating spaces, so that we could have a bigger story to tell and realize that we're more alike than we think, and that we're not alone.
Wow, that is potent. I love how you harnessed your journalism background and your interviewing gifts and being able to see the larger story, that you were one part of the story, and your own personal experience fueled your interest to go deeper and write something that didn't exist, and then bring other people in. So how did you find these people that you interviewed for the book? And was everyone that you asked pretty receptive to being a part of this?
Yeah. Well, it was interesting. When you talk to somebody, I was like, well, what do you think about that? Like, oh, other people say like, oh, I don't want to be the only one. They're like, I want to. Or I could tell when they talked, there was things that they went through, and I wanted to find the through line. Was it the way they raise? Is it the way they think? Is it their mindset? And it wasn't just about their job. It was an essence of who they are. And each one came from different stories. And so that's why it's so important, because I wanted everyone to see themselves in the book, right? Women, people of color, men, Black men, Asian men, neurodivergent. And I think, and in the end, what you realize is all of us feel like the only in some respects, right? But to realize that we're not alone, but there's layers of it. I may have like 7 layers of being the only, where is that the man next to me grew up really poor. Like I have the executive producer of Chopped on here, and you wouldn't think that he's an only. He's a white man. He's like, I grew up on food. I grew up on, subsidized lunches. I grew up in this tiny town. I never felt like I fit in. I fly into Hollywood, and here's how I navigate spaces. And we all have something to learn from that. But as well as the only one in the room, where women, we're used to being the only one in the room, thinking differently, seeing things differently. And that's what the power is that you see, understand, and feel things differently, and you're able to leverage that experience to help yourself and others. And that is the power of it. Whereas sometimes it takes us a while to step into that power. And that's what the book maps out, is the 5 principles of how do we go from I'm the only one to creating that power, and then creating change for others as well.
Yes, potent. Okay, so there's 5 principles. Do you want to walk us through some of them or all of them? How do you want to do this?
Yeah, well, own your power is the obvious one, but it starts with actually owning your opportunity. And what I mean by owning your opportunity is not just the opportunity in front of you. It's not just saying yes. It's when someone says it hasn't been done before. You can't do this. This isn't the way it's done. Because when you're an only one, sometimes you're creating something new that hasn't been done before. And so it's kind of stories that tell you how you do it. And so my principles start with, what is own your opportunity? Why don't we? Because we have to know our limitations and be aware of what's actually holding us back. And then how do you do it, right? By telling people stories, as well as all the interactive exercises. Number two is own your power, is to believe that we already have it. How do we take up space? Why don't we take up space, right? How do we step into our power and see that we truly have it and own our worth? Own your voice, not just the voices that you project in the stories, but the voices in our head. What do we tell ourselves? What are the stories? How do we see ourselves? And own your communication reads like a communication manual. It's my work in the world. Who are you? What do you stand for? How do you show up in the world? How do you connect with your audience? It reads more like, I feel like if you want to own your power of the only, you really have to own your communication and connection skills, which I think are so important. And then it's, how do you own your future? And owning your future is going from surviving to thriving. Because if you've been an only, you may already own your power. You may already own your voice. You've navigated those spaces. And now you're burnt out and you're tired. And you're like, it's a burden. I don't want to do it anymore. And so what got us to the level of success, if you're an only, you know what you did, right? You kept going. But that's not what's going to sustain owning our future. So I felt like I really needed to and it's a lot of the work that you do as well. It's like I'm a little woo-woo in that sense, but I work with a lot of corporate clients as well as entrepreneurs. But the latter part is all those healing tools, the excavation. How do you go from survival mindset to thriving mindset? Where did that come from? And then a lot of the healing tools that I use, and I'm still going through, to really regulate my nervous system and get to that next level. We can't do things the same way as I did when I was 20, right? So I have a roadmap when I'm 20, now in midlife, or even like if you were 20, if I had these tools earlier, might have helped me from going through all the burnout.
Yes. Thank you. Exactly. You look back, if I could tell her what I know now, I would have saved her some heartache and some pain. And at the same time, it's like this interesting balance, because that's how you learned. But, Angela and I are both mothers, and I was just talking to someone recently. I have a son and a daughter. I have 2 sons and a daughter. You have a son and a daughter. And I think a lot about my daughter, especially wanting her not to fall in some of the holes that I fell in, like giving her, can she start here where I started here? She's still going to need to learn lessons, but with what I'm aiming to pour into her and pour into my sons, can they have a different starting point, perhaps? That's something that I play with, while not taking away their opportunity to learn, to have these experiences. It's like, it's this interesting act of that you're trying to.
So hard. Like, when my daughter embodies abundance, sometimes I get annoyed, right? Because it's triggering my lack of, when I was younger, I didn't have that abundance, right? Like, and I did my job then, right? I'm rushing around and doing the things, and my daughter's a hard worker, and she has that sometimes too. And I'm like, you know what? It's okay. Trying to give her the validation that it's okay. We don't have to push, even though I love that in her. But one day she's she had a thing in her hair, and she was sipping a cup of tea, which I tell people, do enjoy your process in the tea. And I'm rushing around the house, and part of me is thinking, why aren't you rushing like I am? And it triggered something in me. And that means I have to do a little more work, that I actually want her to feel abundant, want her to be able to work hard, get ready for school, and be able to drink a cup of tea without rushing. And in my mind, I was like, what's this with your, like, she had like eye patches on and like a face mask and was enjoying life. And it was interesting. It triggered something in me, but it's exactly what I wanted her to do, because she still does her work and she's a hard worker, but it was hard, right? And that means that we still have those things inside us that, maybe haven't been resolved. And so it's something I challenge with.
Yeah. So with you on that. Thank you for bringing that up.
I give you some grit, and my kids have it. Sometimes
mine do too, but I'm like, hello, we got to get cruising here. Okay.
Life is so easy, right? Like, that's what made us strong, right? Those are the things, the challenges. So you want to make sure you don't protect them from all the challenges, because that's what allowed us to step into the power of the only. And so I tried to weigh that a little bit. It's like, okay, we got to toughen you up a little bit, but without any extreme.
Yes. It's playing with all of those pieces. And it's good to talk about this because yes, you are a business owner, I'm a business owner, and we're also parents, and we both have partners, and we have,
so much
our own parents, and then we have, and it's a lot to hold. So you mentioned, the burnout that you have known. I certainly know a lot about that. And I'm curious, what are some of the techniques and tools that maybe you talk about them in your book, but that have been really helpful for you to leave burnout over here, or like not see that it has to be a part of your life? How do you take care of yourself, and how do you suggest others do this?
It's interesting. It's that internal urgency, right? Where you always feel like you got to do. And that's what made us successful. So it's hard to rewire, because what got you to where you are is the pattern that we're used to. I got rewarded for it. Every time, like, push through. And it's great to have that grit and skill. But as you know, it's regulating your nervous system. I didn't even realize that my nervous system was out of whack until you relax. And then your body either shuts down, but it's that constant everyday regulation of the nervous system. And I remember the first time someone taught me a tool, they're like, look at a flower. And I'm like, what do you mean, look at a flower? Like, they're like, slow down. I'm like, what do you mean? And I do yoga and I do all those things. But I think it's the constant reminder of noticing, the Yerkes-Dodson law is this thing where you need a certain amount of stress to get to the top of performance. And if you have too much, you will come down. So I think through the years, it's honoring and knowing, what is my peak point, and when do I start to feel in my body, whereas before I would just push on through and then come down, and I wouldn't even know that I had a high point or a low point. I just did what I needed to do. And I think as you get older, it's recognizing those tools. So yes, yoga, the deep breathing, and it's interesting, nostalgia. I put a couple things in the book that are things that you wouldn't think about. There's a lot of research on nostalgia and so appreciating all the joy in your life. Also blocking out the negative, right? With so many news headlines. I talk a lot about media literacy in the book, how to decipher between what's real as a real threat versus what's not. What is yours to carry? What is not, right? Because we can take it all on. If you're a strong, powerful, only woman, you're like, I got this. Well, sometimes you don't have to have it, right? So it's all right when it's not yours. But I want to talk about the nostalgia piece, is that it actually activates parts of your brain. So I have a free playlist actually on my thing. But I do the 80s music as well, a memories list. It triggers the nostalgic feelings, which actually lead to more well-being and can lower stress and cortisol. And I do that automatically because it's fun, but there's actually science behind it, that nostalgia, or looking at old photos, or whenever you get stuck and you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm starting over, or I got laid off, or I'm starting something new. I'm nothing. I'm starting from zero. You're not starting from zero, right? You have to remember all the things that you've done. I'm sorry, I gave you a whole bunch of tools in there, but nostalgia, right? Nostalgia, things that make you happy, looking back at pictures, looking back at music. But there's one method I call the woohoo method. The woohoo method is about those times of transition, because that's when, let's say you've tackled everything, I have all these things, I know what to do. But when you're going through a transition, whether you're moving from, like I am, midlife, or you're empty nesting, or you're changing jobs, or any type of transition, you start to feel like, I'm not enough, right? All those I'm not enough things come back. But the woohoo list is a reminder to yourself, wait a second, I have done these things. So I make a list of all the things that I'm grateful for, that I'm proud of. It doesn't have to be a goal or a skill. It could be an emotion, or the way you handled something, or who you are. And it's important sometimes to sit down to gain that resilience, to remind yourself who you are, right? So I use those in moments. I haven't needed it right now because I've been busy with the book tour. But when I left my news job in journalism, I lost my identity, right? And even though I consciously chose it, and it's for women out there that are listening, that like, you're going through a transition, you're starting something new, you have to remind yourself, all those things didn't go away because you went through a transition. Your cognitive brain just forgot about them.
Right, exactly. Sometimes when we lose the title, like, well, I'm no longer the newscaster at XYZ station, or no longer I remember when I left both of my corporate jobs, and all of a sudden I go, I can't call myself that anymore. I'm not that. Who am I? And then you start feeling like you're less than because you don't have this title, but you're not less than. You're still you. You're still you, and you are in the process of becoming, which we are always in the process of.
Yeah.
I love the nostalgia piece. I absolutely love that. Now I know why I felt so good when I was watching. I don't know if Angela, if you were into this show, but you know what I'm saying. Cobra Kai. Did you see?
I just finished the last episode. When did you finish the last episode?
Couple weeks back. Back.
And my husband doesn't watch TV at all. I'm I grew up a latchkey kid. I grew up on TV. I love TV, everything TV. I don't have always time. So we pick select shows like, what was the one on Apple TV with the coach? Why did I just forget it?
Ted Lasso.
Yeah. So my husband and I only watch select shows. I watch different shows. But when Cobra Kai, we watched season 1, season 2, and then we were waiting for the last season. And I get out of control when I'm sitting there and I'm going, yeah, like with it. And it was, yes. But I loved it. And the nostalgia part, how they brought it back. And so there's a science to that. There's a feeling that you get. You go back in time, and the closure that they gave, it was just.
Oh, they did the closure. I was so grateful. Like,
we won't do any spoilers, but
but it was just, if you haven't seen the show and maybe you're an 80s kid, like I was born in 1977. What year, Angela?
73. Yeah.
Okay. 73. All right. We're both 70s kids. But yeah, 80s was, when you were really in the prime of that childhood, and it's just the music, the fact, if you saw Karate Kid growing up, which I was obsessed with that movie. And I actually wrote about Karate Kid in my book, Get Gutsy, because I think there were so many great metaphors and messages in that film. Mr. Miyagi, wax on, wax off, and then Cobra Kai comes out, and it freaking blew our minds. And it was so great because my kids were into it for a while. It was on for several years, the way they dropped out the seasons. Towards the end, they didn't like it as much as I did, but I maintained my passion for the show.
In some parts, it got a little, for some people, it got a little cheesy. They couldn't handle it, but I could see through that because of the nostalgia. Warmth. And so, yes, nostalgia. And also, art is really good. It's so interesting. There's another study that shows that 45 minutes of art can lower your cortisol and take you back down and regulate your nervous system. And that, one art project a month for your life can extend your life by 10 years.
Really? One art project a month?
There's this, gosh, I quote her in here, but she wrote a book on the kind of like the research and the behind art. Right. And there's some research. I wanted to back it up because the feelings, but now so in the book, I was really, I wanted to, I do this. I like doing this, but why do I do this? And what does it do for your body? And so that's kind of what I did. I backed everything with kind of research studies so you understand why it works. And sometimes you don't have to understand it. It just works, but it's nice to have
the That's the journalist in you, and I appreciate it. I think that's why we always connected. I have a background in journalism as well. I went to the College of Journalism and Communications, and I had to take a reporting class and then photojournalism. And then I went into PR, which is very much, we use data, but it was much more like, let's just go for it. And in journalism, it is, you got to have the quotes and the backup and the this and the that. And so I appreciate what you did in your book and how I want everyone to take in how Angela's path it's just led her from one thing to the next. Like when you look at your life now, Angela, and you look back to when you were that, like, I was the only Asian girl in this, or I was the only that. Did you imagine this? Did you even know that this was a possibility? Kind of the way that you're living now and what you do for work? Like, does this blow your mind?
I mean, it's so crazy. So this weekend, before I take my son on college tours, I'm speaking at USC. And I'll tell you, I got into USC late, but I couldn't afford it. So I never went. USC was great for broadcast journalism. So I always knew I wanted to be, that's my origin story. I always wanted to be like Connie Chung. Connie Chung was a news icon growing up in Los Angeles. I watched her on TV and my dad said, "Hey, you could be like Connie Chung." And I said, "What?" And I said, "Yeah, I could be like Connie Chung." And I was like, nah, and I didn't think about it for years. And then in high school, even at the pageant, I was like, I'm going to be a broadcast journalist. So part of me knew, but I hit so many setbacks along the way that I talked myself out of it and I didn't go into it right away. But so you're asking me if I ever knew. No, when I was alone sitting in that room watching Connie Chung, I kind of felt a feeling like, oh, I can do this. But it wasn't the same as like, actually doing it. Then I talked myself out of it. But as far as technology, the things that we can do now, I would have never imagined that. But I did have a feeling that I said to myself, I wrote down, I want to be like Connie Chung. One day I will write a book. I knew that. I think you're a list maker too. I wrote down all my goals. And I think before, I'd never done any personal development. My parents are Chinese immigrants. I was locked in my room listening to 80s music. I didn't read any self-help. I didn't have any tools. But I think intuitively, sometimes you know how to take care of yourself, right? Yes. And so now I look back at the things and I'm like, wow, I did that,
Yeah.
And I did that before I knew it was an actual thought leader tool, right? That you needed to do. But I never saw myself exactly where I was, but I feel like I had that feeling. And I think what that feeling is. I don't know what form it was going to take, but I always knew that I was here to kind of help people, or when my parents didn't have a voice, I always felt that calling with news. It wasn't about being on TV. It's like, how can I support people? How can I tell their stories?
How can I tell their story? Yeah. I have to tell you, Angela, I do a lot of work. I have a few corporate clients. I don't know if we haven't talked about. Now we're getting to talk, and it's so great. And I have one client called Chief, and they're great. They're a organization for senior executive women to continue leading at high levels and really go for it in their careers and who they are as leaders. And I get to do a lot of coaching and facilitation work with this organization. I have groups that I lead and guide, and it's been fantastic. For the last few years, I've been connected with this company, and they bring in speakers to wow the crowd, wow these amazing women executives. And one of the speakers was Connie Chung. So I had a chance
when she launched her memoir. Yes,
when she launched her memoir, it was a virtual session, but it was so freaking cool. She's a breath of fresh air. She just told it like it was. She has stories. I had new viewpoints on Dan Rather. I was like, okay, then, it was not easy for her. And she talks about how
I have a funny story about Connie Chung, but you could.
She had to be like a man, but then she also realized, no, I'm going to be Connie and the only woman. And she wasn't well received, like to feel like this person who's sitting next to me does not want me here. Okay. So how do you handle that? So I really appreciate her.
Oh my gosh. I have to tell you the only story. So actually at South by Southwest, I just went to the chief room with that.
Yes, so you were there. Good.
The new CEO and all the people. Yes. But let me tell you my Connie Chung story, right?
Yes.
So I always wanted to be like Connie Chung. Yeah. And I worked my way. I didn't do news. And then finally I went back into it 3 years later after working in Hollywood. I went away to small towns, worked my butt off, and finally made it back. 19 years later, I worked at KCBS, the same station where Connie Chung was. So I did do that. But now fast forward, I've left the news business, whatever. And I was about to write this book, and I met Connie Chung once when I was a early bird reporter, like in Bakersfield, and I have a picture with her. So when I started The Power of the Only, she was my first episode. It was talking about, this was 6 years ago, talking about the power of the only and how she navigated spaces in a very different time where there wasn't support for the only. She truly was the only and had to create, like you said, be a man and do all these things. We don't have to do that as much anymore. There's different ways to navigate it, but she had no choice, right? She was the only and didn't realize it. But then when I was writing the book, and I knew she was working on something because I was going to interview her for something. And I was like, she's been hiding out for years. I go, Maury just retired. She must be writing her memoir. I can't wait. And one day I was going to do this event, and they said she can't come. And I was going to interview her, and it was going to be my full circle big moment on this stage because she's about to launch her book. And I'm like, I knew it. So I knew about the book like a year before she had released it. And so the moment she went live on Instagram with Maury, that's how she announced her book. I was like on fire. And I actually did get to see her a few months ago in San Francisco. And so I handed her a letter of everything, my whole story. And I thanked her for being the only, and that her ancestors were smiling. And that even though she's like, I didn't know, because she didn't know what she was doing. She just had to do it. And so that's the backstory of, I did some crazy things for this book, but one of them was like, I was chasing Connie Chung down, trying to find and I needed to hand her the letter. And so I did send her a copy of the book.
Good.
And it starts with my story of Connie Chung and it ends with her legacy. So Connie Chung is a big part of this book, even though I don't tell a lot of her stories in there, but she was the inspiration for the book. So I wanted her to know that.
Oh, that is so awesome. And she showed a video during her talk. And you probably know this, Angela, but all of these women were named Connie because their parents were so inspired by Connie Chung. They're like, I want my daughter to have the energy and the confidence of Connie. And so they have this annual gathering of the Connies. They showed it.
Well, but that's why it's
Angela might have frozen. Hopefully she's back as we're talking about the power of the only and our stories of Connie Chung. Yeah, you're back.
Oh, I was saying, as I told my story, you realize you're not alone. I'm not the only Asian woman reporter that wanted to be like Connie Chung, or not even the only woman. I talked about this story and everyone's like, I want to be like Connie Chung. And representation matters. That's why it's so important. And that's why this book to me is like the best way I can show up is tell these stories, because then other people see themselves and they realize like, wait, I feel that way too. Wait, I'm not alone. Oh, wait, I want to do that. And it's so important because the representation, look at with all the Connies and with me and the ripple effects of when you step into your power of the only, you don't always know. And she didn't know. And I'm so glad that she got her glory full circle moment, because she didn't know. She was just navigating spaces, doing her work, and didn't realize how much impact she has. And I believe that there's people in your audience that are doing the same things. You don't always know the impact, and you might not get the full circle moment, but you have to trust that you're doing the path.
Right. You got to keep taking those steps forward. Sometimes you don't know until all of a sudden somebody hands you the letter, all those, what? You were watching, you were doing this because if you're really focused on the work, you're just really focused on that work. And I believe that's what connects everyone tuning into this, is that we're passionate about what it is that we do. We're passionate about our work. You mentioned something, Angela, that I want to pick up on, and I know we're just about at the end here, that I really want to double down on, where you said you talked yourself out of pursuing that particular path, and then you eventually came back to it. This is something that so many women especially do, and that I want us to shine a light on today. Stop talking yourself out of the moves, the experiences, the decisions that really excite you, that really activate you. There's something in that. Have you noticed that too in just your own journey, Angela, and the people that you support? That tendency to you want it, but then you're like, oh, no, probably not me. I might not work out. I might embarrass myself. And,
all of us do it. It's that, the rewiring of our system. So I was raised a Chinese immigrant child. And even though my dad said, hey, you could be like Connie Chung, when I told him I want to do it, he said, oh, that's dangerous. Oh, you're not going to make it as an Asian girl. And all of us get these messages from society, from the media, from our parents, or, you may have super supportive parents, but, in the space, there's these things of don't rock the boat, don't stand out too much. And we get these signals and these messages, and it starts to mute our inner knowing. Right. And so the job for us is to peel back those layers and to get to that core. And it's a journey. And so that's why it's great. I wanted to be like Connie Chung. I became Connie Chung. That's what it looks like. But in between, there were these setbacks and these things where I talked myself out of it. And I could have talked myself out of it completely. But in the end, that thing that's inside me, whatever that thing, still was slightly bit louder than the voices in my head that I was literally trained and programmed to believe. I was able to overcome them. And sometimes you're not able to overcome them. So those are the things that we need to understand. That's why it's important to understand what's stopping me, where did it come from, and what is mine and what is not mine, so we can override that programming and create the path that we want to, and really let that call that you have in your belly to shine through. And all of us have to go through it. There's not a straight line, but having some tools and having a coach like you can help you on your path. Oh, that's not real. Oh, that's real. I have to deal with that. And to peel back those layers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now I'm remembering with the event that we first met at, and we need to give a shout out to Allie Brown, because Allie Brown did bring us together all those years ago. Because I remember, this is exactly kind of the point that I'm making right now. We went to that event. It was Arizona,
Yes.
and
Like 2016.
it
I don't
was
know.
like the repower or something. It was like the content. It was a content event, and you go, I heard the call. I heard the call. It was like the bat call or the dog whistle and the whatever. I got the call. I heard the chime ringing, and I picked up the phone, and I'm here. And you made this point that we all heard that call. And for some of us, you're like, why am I doing this? I'm getting on a plane. Wait, hold on. I don't know anyone who's going to be in the room. And then it's so normal to then kind of talk yourself out of it. But what you said at that event, Angela, which I so resonate with, and I think we've been friends ever since that, was we heard the call and we trusted it and we took action.
And so, I want to attribute something else to her. She said this to me after the event. We talked about the power of the only. Allie was my first guest. And I told her about the power of the only. And she goes, in life, sometimes you get a message and you get, it comes to you. And if you don't take it and run with it, it moves on.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, no, it can't move on, and I felt it deeply. And that day I wrote the blog. I wrote the blog. I kind of cemented the power of the only is my concept. And I started the podcast. I was like, and I said, can you be my first guest? And it was like, it was an idea. It became a thing. It became a post. It became me sharing it. It became me gathering more onlys. It became the podcast. And now it's a book. And sometimes it doesn't happen overnight. And it didn't. It took like years. And I tabled this book so many times because I have kids and I'm a working mom and my husband travels for work. And I put it off and I cried and I was like, I can't do this right now. And then in the end, I was like, I can't wait till I'm an empty nester to get this out into the world. And even publishing, I fast tracked it because they said, 2026. I'm on, no, that's too far. I'm on 2024. And then it became 2025 because of the election. But it worked out in the right time, but it took a lot longer than I thought it would, but it happened.
Right. Exactly. Well, congratulations, Angela. It's a huge accomplishment. And you got yourself into that room. I got myself into that room. That also speaks to the power of getting yourself into really potent rooms where sometimes people you don't know. You don't know exactly why you're being called to go there, but you're trusting it because you get these downloads there. It's so important for women to remember that. Invest in yourself, get on the plane, get in your car, do the thing, make the investment. Those ideas, we are messengers, but you have to be an open vessel to receive the message. As you said, the message will move on if you don't do something. Somebody else is going to get that message and then you're going to see them do it and go, what? that was
right. Right? Because we have to honor our life stages. Like I always say, like you always ask me, did you know? I think when I was young, I always knew I would do something. I didn't know what it looked like. I didn't know how to get there. And even now, when I say write the book, I'm like, when I did the podcast, I'm going to write the book. It doesn't have to be right this second. I know, and I just felt it. But then you have to be willing to invest the time and the energy. And when your life stage sometimes doesn't match what it needs to get something there, you're like, it's okay, but I know it's going to happen. But when I'm ready to step into it, I'm going to step into it. But you have to honor what you're able to do and put in the work as well.
Yes. Boom. That is profound. True words spoken. Angela, where can people get the book? Where can they find out more about you?
Oh, thanks so much. I'm at angelachee.com. I'm a keynote speaker. Coaching is all on there. And the poweroftheonly.com is all the information about the book, but they're all linked together. And I'm at Angela Chee TV on Instagram and Angela Chee on LinkedIn. And as well as Facebook at Angela Chee TV. So yes, reach out to me. And if you do check out the book, I have a bunch of freebies, which is a free playlist, as well as all the inspirational quotes. I wanted to make sure that there were highlights, exercises, and quotes where someone could kind of skim through the book and take it each section at a time. But it's a whole inspirational quote book is a free bonus as well.
Ooh, I do not speak inspirational quote language. That is something
I know. I love it. I was like, I want those nuggets where I wanted people to just flip through the book and they could get something just by reading the highlights in the corners.
Right. Yeah, you would get a kick out of my last. Well, actually, you know, when I worked in corporate in New York, I had my either a student at my office or my cube or whatever the structure was where I was working. But and some spaces were more inspirational than others. Let's just say the design aesthetic of the office and the company. But what I always brought with me were my inspirational quotes. So I would print them out and then like cut around them and put tape and then put them all around my office. And so those would keep me going. So what did you say?
I love
Yes.
I mean, it's even in my bio. I really do like them. I think when I was a little kid, I would write these philosophical things, and I'm like, how did I know? I was 10. I hadn't lived life or loved, but you kind of know. And I would write these like weird sayings or inspirational quotes. I have a diary since I was little, but I've always loved, and I think that's why we're alike. It's like we feel intuitively certain things and we feel called, but those quotes are just magical. Words are magical.
Yes, they sure are. Well, Angela, you are magic. This has been
You are magic. Coach magic.
We're both magic. Exactly. This is Coach Magic. This has been magical. It's very on brand. And everybody go check out Angela's book. Go find her. Angela, you are incredible. I'm so grateful that we both heard that call, got to that event, met, and I'm just so inspired by you. And I'm so thrilled that we get to do this. We get to do this. And shout out to Connie Chung. I hope Connie sees this. And Connie, we're so inspired by you. Yeah. And everybody who feels like you are the only, Angela has done a great service in helping you see that that is a superpower. Use it as such. Go do the thing that you came here to do. This is Jenny Fennick signing off for Coach Magic. I will see you all again soon. Be well.